working as the associate director in a company called Authenticated. So in today's session, we will be going to see how you can implement or add the authentication and authorization in your Azure Function app. Okay, first we will be developing the Azure Function app without authentication, without authorization. Slowly we will be adding the authentication by using the different identity providers. Then we will be seeing some of the security mechanism that you can be added into the Azure Functions as well. So once the Azure Functions are ready, then we can deploy into the Azure API management services. Still we can add some more security features so that your Azure Functions will be more secure for accessing for the users. So today what I am going to cover is some of the basic security options and some notes about the authorization levels that are available in the Azure Functions, then different ways that you can protect your Azure Functions, and we will be seeing the live demo on the protecting the Azure Functions as well. And finally, I will be covering some of the security recommendations that you need to be used for the Azure Functions as well. So what are the prerequisites? You need to have an Azure Active subscriptions and Postman, and you may be required Visual Studio if you want to validate the tokens. Okay, so what is authentication? So authentication is nothing but verifying the user identity. That means when you are trying to access on a particular resource, you want to validate the username and password. So that is called authentication. So authorization means once the user is authenticated, you want to make sure the user can access on a particular resource or not. So that is called authorizations. Okay. So before going to the functions, so we need to cover some of the keywords. Okay, so these are the keywords that was talked by in the other sessions as well. So OAuth, JWT token, and Azure AD, tenant ID, client secrets, and manifest files. Okay, so few words about the JSON web tokens. That is called JWT. Simply it is called. So it is generally used to exchange the authorization informations between different applications. Okay. And Azure AD, so that is the directory store, and the client ID, client secrets, that we can see it in the demo as well. Okay, so the Azure Functions provides in a different authorization levels. So basically it provides the anonymous authorization levels. That means you don't need to provide any of the authentication key or the authorization key to access the functions. And it provides the function level API key. So that is the by default it will be chosen. And so you have the system authorization level, admin authorization level, as well as the user authorization levels. For the user authorization levels, you need to write your own code to determine whether the user is authorized or not. So the other options are by default within the Azure Functions. So the user one you need to write on your own. So let's come to the next one. So different ways of protecting the Azure Functions. So the first one comes is the identity provider. So you can use any one of the identity provider to validate your Azure Functions. The next one is the API management, and you can use some of the network restrictions, and we can use the managed identities, we can use client certificates, we can use the Defender for Cloud, and we can use the log analytics as well. So these are the different ways that you can protect your Azure Functions. Let's see about the the identity providers. So the identity providers are built on the OIDC, that is called Open Data Identity Connect. So that is used for communicating to different protocols. The very first one is the Microsoft Identity Platform. So that is serviced by the Azure AD. So it is also called as an easy auth. So that means you no need to write any single line of code to implement the identity providers. So simply you can, once the Azure function is deployed, so you can turn on the authentication and you can configure it within the Azure portal itself. Then your authentication start works. So when the user is trying to access your Azure functions, they will be authenticated. So there are different identity providers: Facebook, Google, Apple, GitHub. Those are the other identity providers. Okay, basically how this identity provider works. Okay, so there are two endpoints are required here. So one is called token endpoint. Another one is called a discovery endpoint. When a client application requests a token, so it will be sent to the token endpoint, whereas the token will connect to the identity provider to generate the JWT token, and it will be served to the client application. So once the client application receives the JWT, it sends to the actual resource. The actual resource connects to the discovery endpoint to verify the JWT is valid or not. If it is valid, then the request will be served. Otherwise, the user will get the unauthorized error. Okay, so that's about the identity providers. So the next important one is the Azure Functions over the API management. Okay, so here also you can use the authentication features that is available on the API management, and even you can use the subscription key as well as the client certificates. Apart from this, you can enable the access restriction policies like rate limit. So rate limit is if some of the user keep on requesting for a particular URL or a particular API request, you can block it based on the time. So once the time is elapsed, then you can allow them again. And the quota limit also you can do. Even we can verify the JWT validations in the API management also. Even we can control the request based on the web application firewall by using the application gateway. And the API management supports the revisions as well as the versions. So based on this, you can allow for the particular request where it needs to be go and which version of the API it needs to go. Okay. So the next one is the network restrictions. So on the network restrictions, all the you can tell the user when they are requesting on a HTTP protocol, you can redirect them to the HTTPS. So that you can do it, and you can restrict the course access. So when you restrict the course access, not all the JavaScript applications can be accessing your applications. You can enable which domains needs to be accessed your applications, that you can control it. Okay. And you can restrict the Azure functions or the APIs based on your IP address, that also can be restricted. And even if you can use the Azure virtual network, so that communication happens between your applications as well as within the Azure network, so it will not be available for the over the internet. So the next option is the managed identities. So managed identities, okay, the problem with the client ID as well as the secret, someone has to maintain the client ID as well as the client secret in somewhere, either it will be on your configuration file or in the Azure Key Vault. Okay, what in case if the person left the organization? We faced a very similar situation, and one of our SSL certificate is invalid, and when we wanted to renew it, and we are not unable to access the client secret, and so basically we have to reconfigure it. So that's the problem that we face today. So that is one of the problem. So to overcome this, we can use the managed identities. So these identities will be created whenever you are creating a new resource. You can enable these options to create the managed identity. So when a particular resource is created, so that time when you check the managed identity to be created, it is called a system identity. Otherwise, the user can, or the global administrator can create the user identity, and it can be used for the authentication purposes. All the application whichever supports the Azure AD, that can be used for the identities, and there is no additional cost also is required. Okay, so the next option is we can even use the client certificates. We can enable this option in the Azure functions. Once you turn on these functions, you can supply the client client certificates to authenticate your request rather than supplying the username and password or the client ID or secret. Okay, so the next option is the Defender for Cloud. So you can use this option also to restrict, and it provides, basically it monitors your request and resources. If there is any anonymous behavior is raised, then it will do an alertings. So that's called in the Defender for Cloud. So there are two things. So you can do, one of the thing is it will do the findings based on your configurations. So if there some of the configuration is not correct, then it will raise an alert. And if there is any anonymous request or DDoS attacks, is kind of things is there, then it will also do it by using the monitoring. The last option will be the log analysis. So there are different ways that you can do the log analysis. One is on the application insight, and you can use the Azure Monitor, Azure Sentinel. These are the different options where you can do the logs as well as the traces. Based on the logs and traces, you can generate the reports and you can monitor it. Okay. Okay. So let's get into the demo. So in the demo, what we are going to see is, so first we will create an, I have already just created an Azure functions. We will turn on the identity provider. We will create an Azure AD authentications. We will validate it. And there is a website called JWT.ms. Then we will do a quick view about the JSON web token as well. Then we will create the JWT token by using the Postman as well as the Azure portal as well. Then we will test our application also. So this is the, I just created an Azure Functions, so in the portal itself, and right now it is it's a kind of an anonymous authorized applications, and there is no authentication also is provided. So here you can see that in the header, it is completely on the anonymous, so there is no authorization is there. So what I will do is, I'll go to the Azure Functions, I'll go to the authentication area. Here is the place where we are going to configure the identity provider. Okay, I'll click the identity provider. So here you can see there is a bunch of the identity providers are available. So I'll click the Microsoft. So here it is asking a couple of options, whether do you want to do a new app registrations or you want to pick up the existing one. To make it very simple, so we'll do create a new app registrations, and it is asking another option is how do you want to, so who are the users, whether the users are exist only within your tenant or it is in a multi-tenant application or it's in a completely free for everyone. So that means anyone can use it with the Microsoft accounts. Okay. And the another authentication option is whether do you want to require authentication or allow unauthenticated access. So when you say require authentication, all the requests will be authenticated. And when you say allow unauthenticated access, the request will not be authenticated. So all the users will come in. So this allow unauthenticated access will be benefit when you are using in a single page applications. Okay, so let's start creating it. So it says the application name will be the live demo. So I'm just using the current tenant and require authentications. Okay, so I'm just going to add. So now what it will do is in the behind the scenes, it will do a new app registrations in the Azure AD. So we'll be seeing that as well. So when I click edit, so here you can see there is a client ID is there. Okay. So now if I try to call the Azure Functions, so I'll just go and execute this Azure function. So it will say unauthenticated. So this is the app registration. So where all our application will be registered here. So we'll copy this client ID. So we'll search it here and it will list out. So this is the application, it got registered. Okay. So here a couple of things that we need to be remember. So if when you click the endpoints, it will list out all the endpoints based on your protocol requirements. So you can use it based on your client application authentications. Okay. So the next one will be the authentication area. So where here is the place, so once the user is authenticated, where it needs to be redirected. So during the redirections only, the authentication cookie will be set into this redirect URL. The next one will be the client secrets, certificates and secrets. So here, if you see here now the as it is doing a new registration, so we are not able to see the client secret as well. So, but there is a way where we can see it. I'll show you that as well. So now we'll just try to test these functions. Okay, so now it's saying you don't have any permission to access this page because we are turned on the authentications. So now let's go and authorize this request. So what we will do is we'll go to the Azure Functions configurations. So here only the Azure function maintains the client secrets. We can copy it, then we can go to the Postman, we can generate the token for the authentication, then we can pass the token to get this value. So here is the key. So Microsoft provider authentication secret. When you double click, so you will get this secret. So you can copy this secret. I'll store it in somewhere. Okay, so I'll go here. So click the Azure functions. Okay, so now let's generate the JWT token. So what I will do is I'll clear all the other tokens. Okay, so we need to have a couple of informations. I'll show you as well. Okay, the first one, it is asking what is your type of grant type. So there are different types of grant type. So one is the authorization code, and you can use the password credentials when you want to use the username and password. You can use the client credentials as well. So there are different ways. So now we are going to use the authorization code. Okay, and the auth URL will be, so you can you can get it from the endpoints. So let's come to the overview. Click the endpoints. So here you can see the first one is the authorization endpoint. So I'll copy this authorization endpoint. So I'll paste it here. Okay. Then the next one will be the access token URL. Okay. So the second one will be the access token URL. I'm copying that as well. I'll paste it here. Okay. Now we need to have the client ID. So the client ID will be here. So you can copy this client ID. I'll paste it here. And this is the client secret that we have copied and pasted in the Notepad++. We'll copy that also. Okay, so now the next one is the scope. The scope is what kind of operations that you want to allow your user to do it once the user is authenticated. So that needs to be configured on the app registrations. We'll come to the the API permissions. So sorry, the expose and API. So there already the scope is created. So that is called user impersonation. So we'll copy this. We'll paste it over here. Okay. So now I'm asking the OAuth server for generate the new token. So now basically it will asking me to do the authentication. So okay, so now it says I have to set the callback URL as I'm requesting it from the postman. I'll go here. I'll go to the authentication section. I will add new URI. Save this. Cancel. Get new access token. Okay. So sometimes when you create the scope, it takes few seconds. So now it's generating the token. So it says the authentication is completed. So now you can see the token as well. Strange behavior. There is no problem. So I have the backup application that I have created. So we'll use that. So it will be changes only in the URLs only. So okay, so here is the another application that is generated the access token. So let's see what is about this access token. So let's go here. So this is the nice URL where you can see about the access token. Okay, so this access token has the three parts. One is the header that is mentioned somewhere around the red or the brown. The second one, the blue color, so that is on the payload. Third one will be the signature that is mentioned on the green color. Okay, so all these informations will be displayed over here. So the first one talks what kind of header that it has been used, and here is the payload. Okay, all the claim details. So when this token will be generated, when it will be expired, and which application it can be accessed, all these informations will be present. Okay, if you want to see some more details, you can click the claims, then you can see everything in the descriptive way as well. Okay, now let's see why this function is not generated. Now it's got generated. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this token. Okay, so I'll paste it here. Okay, so we can see when this token is generated, it is generated now, and when it will be expired is around 6:20. So all this information that we can see here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to the Azure Functions. I'll be adding as an authorization header. Okay, I'm passing as a bearer token with this token. Now I will run this. So now it will say we'll get the valid result from our Azure Functions as this token is valid. So we will be getting it. Okay, so now our Azure function is authenticated. So though the authorization level is anonymous, still this request is authenticated. So this is the one demo that I want to do it. The second one, okay, we have seen this. Configuring the identity provider, configuring the AID and JWT, we have seen it. So we have seen the demo now how to generate the token using the Postman, and we have used it in the Azure portal to test it. And even if you want to use the Visual Studio, you can use it. But for the time constraint, I'm skipping the Visual Studio one. Okay, so I'll go to the next demo. Okay, so now let's see how we can protect our Azure functions by using the API options. So the Azure functions can be imported into the API management console, and it can be served as the valid API request. Okay, so if you know about the content security policy, uh, these two headers, the X powered by as well as your ASP.NET version, is not recommended, because when your end user or the hackers knows your ASP.NET version, and they can easily inject the vulnerabilities based on your ASP.NET version loopholes. So that is the reason it is uh, better to remove those headers. And the next one is what we are going to say is we are going to limit the request policies based on the IP address and based on the number of requests within the time. And after that, we will be seeing the authentication as well as in the API level by using the subscriptions key, and we will be adding the Azure authentication, and we will be writing some more policies to validate the JWT token as well. So let me go here. I'll come here. I'll come to the API management. Okay. The first one, let's go to the portal, the APIs area. So if you want to import your Azure functions, so you can use this function app. So then it will be listed out all your functions here. So now it's based on a different location, by resource location, it's not listing. Otherwise, the functions will be listed out here. So then you can import it. Once it gets imported, so it will be displayed like this Echo API. So we will consider this our Echo API is an Azure function that is already imported in the API management. Okay, so let's elaborate few more things. Okay. So first we will be disabling the authentication. So first we will go without the authentication. We will add some restrictions. Then later we will be adding the authentication. Otherwise, every time we need to pass some of the information. So I'm disabling the subscription required. I'm saving it. And I'll go to the design. We'll add some of the policies for the inbound request as well as the outbound request. Let's go with the outbound. That is simple. So this is the outbound request. So the outbound is nothing but once your request is processed, what are the information that will be sent to the user called the outbound, whereas the inbound, your information, the user sends the information that goes to the server called inbound. It's nothing but an incoming request to the server and as well as the response in terms. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in a policy. Okay. There is something called the set headers. So here I can mention, so I want to remove these headers, correct? So I'll go and mentions, I'll copy this. Then I can put it here. Okay. Then the value will be nothing. So I want to delete it. Okay. So now I'm saving it. So now when the user is trying to access this Echo API, so when the response comes, this X forward will not be there. So we can see it from the test area. I'm going for a get request. So okay, so what I have done is, so I am in the design. So I came to the outbound processing. I clicked add policy. I clicked the set header. I added the X forward and I have selected the action as delete. Okay, then I have saved it. So we'll go and request. So I'm clicking the test. I'm clicking the get request. So I'm requesting. I'm doing the test. It is very similar that we will be requesting on the Postman or any other browser. So here you can see the X powered by is not there. So what I will do is the next request, I'll go and remove the X ASP.NET versions. I'll go to the design. I'll click add policy, set header. I'll add this ASP.NET versions, then delete, save. I'll go click test. I'll do the one more request. On the response, now the ASP.NET versions also will be removed. So you can see here, this is also removed. This is one of the CSP policy, content security policy. So that one of the way of securing your API responses. Okay. The next one will be throttling the incoming request. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write some more policies. This is on the incoming request. Okay, so I'll add policy. If I want to filter my IP, I can say whether this IP should be blocked or added. So what I will do is I'll go IP chicken. So this is the best way to get your current IP. I'm copying the IP address. First, I'll go and block it. So because we have tested our request was working. Okay, I'll go and click blocked IPs. Click this. So this is an optional end range. If you want to use the subnet to give the range, you can specify. Otherwise, you can leave it. Okay, so now I'm going to run a test. Okay, so we got the response. Anybody has any idea, though we have blocked the IP, how we got the response? Yeah, that's correct. So that is executed on the Azure side. So that is the reason we were getting the response. So what I will do is I'll go and copy the URL. I'll execute it on the browser. So now it will say error. See, it says the request is not processed. So we got the 403 error. You can customize the error message, whether you want to use 404 or 302, that you can do it. Okay, so let's come here. So we'll add some more policies. If you want to throttle your user request, you can use the rate limit by key. Okay, how do you want? Okay, so how many calls that you want to allow? So I'm giving like 2 calls. So the renewal will be every 60 seconds. That means per minute they can request only one request. How do you want to do the counter key? So that you can specify whether you want an API subscriptions or IP address. So I'm giving the IP address. So what I'm saying is, from any request comes from this specific IP, for a particular minute, they can do only 2 requests. So that's what I'm specifying it. I'm saving it. Now we'll go and remove the IP address blocking. Otherwise, the other policy will kick in and none of the requests will be served. Okay, so now I'll come to the portal, sorry, the browser. I did a first request. I think it's not yet saved. Okay, the first request is served. Second request served. So third request, it says your rate limit is exceeded. So, and it is saying the other messages as well. You have to try after some time as well. So how many seconds or how many minutes? So that's also we are getting it. So this is the way where you can control your user request as well. Okay, so the next one. Okay, so we are going to see the next interesting part will be uh, going for the request based on the subscriptions keys. So let's go and remove all these policies. Okay, so now I'll go to the settings. So we will enable the API subscriptions key. So when we request the subscription key, so now it should throw an error. So I'm saying the subscription is required. And it says if the request comes with the subscription key, if you are using a header, if you are sending the subscription key on header, then you have to use this key. If you are sending it via the query string parameters, then you have to use the subscription hyphen key. Okay. So what is the best way sending the API keys, whether it's on the header or in the query string? So what should be the best way? Anybody has any idea? Header, because most of the time the web server logs will record your request. If you are sending any sensitive information on the URL, it will be logged and you are giving the information someone to hack your machines. Okay, so use always the header. So what we will do is we will go and copy the subscription keys. So we'll come to the subscriptions. We'll copy this key. So we'll just double click. So I'll copy the primary key. So I'll just paste it here. We'll copy some more informations. Now we'll go to the API. So what with the API. So we'll copy the header key name as well. We'll go to the heading settings. To simplify it, so I'll pass it on the query string parameter. So now what I will do is, so now I'm requesting the same Echo API. So it says access is denied, so I cannot access it. And what I will do is, now I'll pass the API key on the query string parameters. Now your request will be served. So it's returning empty, so that's what we are not getting. At least we are not getting any error. So that's the key thing. Or if you want to test it on your portal itself, so you can come here, you can click the gate, and you can pass it in the query string parameters. So the value, I'll copy the subscription key and paste it, and you can send it here. So you should get the results. We'll get the 200. So we got the 200 as well. Okay, so this is the one option. So the second option is we're going to configure the AID here as well. So here it will work in a slightly different way. So we'll come to the OAuth 2.0. So here you can add your identity provider. So click here. So here it is asking, so I'm just giving the Microsoft AID. Okay, so this is an optional URL. I'm just using something. Okay, so what I can do is either I can use any of the existing registration details, or I can create a new one as well. So what I will do is I'll try to use the existing one. I'll copy the client IDs. Okay, so it is asking the authorization endpoint URL. So I'll go to the Microsoft the app registrations. I'll click the endpoints. Then I'll copy the authorization endpoint. Then it requires the token endpoint URL as well. So the authorization is required for both get and post. So I'm just selecting both. Then I'll copy the token endpoints and paste it here. Okay. So how do you want to authenticate in the body or in the basics? So I'm leaving it as it is. So the scope we need to specify. So I'll go and copy the scope as well. I'll come to the Exposure API and copy the scope. Paste it here. So the client ID that already we have copied here. So I'm just copying the client ID, client secret. Okay, so I'm clicking create. And it is saying where it needs to be redirected. So we have to copy this redirect URI, otherwise your request won't be served. So I'll copy. I'll come to the authentication area. I'll add the your redirect URIs. Now I'll just create. So now what happens is now there will be an authentication token will be generated and it will be attached to the header, and in the future request that you can use it. Okay, so now we have configured the AAD. Okay, so I'll go to the API. I'll click the echo APIs. In the settings, I'll disable the subscription key required options. I'm saving it. Okay, so you might be aware, or somebody, if you are using it, the API management, there is something called the developer portal. So when you click the developer portal, so this will give you a nice interface about your API details, everything. And it is flexible as well as the customizable also. So what I will do is I'll copy this URL. I'll go to the incognito window. I'll paste it. And it gives a nice interface about your API details. So our API resides on the this area. So I'm clicking the APIs. So here it will be listing out the echo API. Okay, I'll select the get. Okay, so this is very similar that we have seen in the API management page on the test tab. So now you can click the try it. So here you can see there is an option. Once the authentication is enabled, here there will be an option. It will come for the authentication token. So let's go and configure it. So come to the APIs. Okay, under the security area, so here there is an OAuth provider is there. You choose the OAuth provider, then it is asking who is your identity provider. So as we have created the identity provider, sorry, we have configured the identity provider, we'll choose the Microsoft AAD and save it. Okay, so it says it saved successfully. Here you can see there is no authentication information was present. So I'll go and refresh this page. So now you can see there is an extra informations will be displayed to generate the token. So here you can see our identity server name, whatever we have given it came, and it says currently it is no auth. When you want to generate the authentication code, you can click the authorization code. Then there will be a pop-up where you need to sign in. So I'm signing in as Murali, and I'm giving my password. If it is successfully configured, we will be getting the token over here. So let's see. So it says it is generated the authorization token. You can see here. So it is generated, and it can be attached to your request, and you can send this request. And if everything is valid, then we will get the results. Now we are getting an error. Uh, it is kind of a blurred. So what it says is the course behavior is not enabled. That means cross-site origin sharing, resource sharing is not enabled. That's the reason from this portal, the JavaScript is unable to complete the request. So we need to enable this. What we'll do is we'll go to the portal settings. Okay, the portal overview. So here you can see there is an enable course is there. So you enable it. So then only the request will be served. Until then, the request will not be served. This is one of the way where you need to restrict only for the domains that you want to access your resource. Okay, so now what we'll do is we'll go here, we'll send the request. So now you can see there is a response, and the authorization token also generated, and it is authenticated as well. Okay, so the next one, what I want to do is configuring the JWT in the policy levels. Okay, so the next step, so we'll go here, we'll go to the API. We'll click the echo API. We'll go to the inbound. We'll add validate JWT. Okay. So there is something called validate JWT policy. You can enable this. Once you enabled, so it will ask what kind of information that you want to pass. So it will be the token will be passed on the authorization header. So we will be saying it's an authorization header. Okay. So if it is failed, what kind of error that you want to generate, and the required expression is sorry, expire time is yes, token is no. Okay. And here interesting information. So we have to configure the OpenID URI where the token has to be validated. So we have to come here, we click here and go to your Azure AD, the app registration page. Okay. Come to the endpoint. So there is an OpenID Connect metadata document information is there. You just copy this. Currently, it uses the version 2.0. You copy this and paste it in the OpenID URI, okay, and save it. So now what we'll do is, now again we will do the same GET request without sending the authentication token. The validate JWT throws on a different error messages, and if you pass an invalid JWT, it will throw on a different error message. So we'll see both. Okay. So now it has been saved. I'll go to the GET request. I'm coming to the same page. So I'll set the authorization as no auth. Okay. I'll send the same request. So we'll get the 401 error. It says your JWT token is not present in the request header. So that's why it says, okay. So now what we'll do is we'll go here, we'll authenticate the user, we'll send the JWT token, we'll get another error message. This is due to a versioning difference between the OpenAuth version 1 and 2. So it says invalid JWT. So we have to make one configuration changes in the Azure app registration page. We'll come here, endpoints. So we'll go to the manifest file. So here you can see the access token accepted version. So this one is set to null. So we have to change to 2.2, then save it. You send the same request again. Now your token will be validated. Wait for a few seconds, it needs to be updated. Let's regenerate. Otherwise, by default, what happens is your JWT token will be generated in version 2 and it is trying to validate with the version 1. See, now you can see our request also validated against the OpenID version 2.0 as well by using the validate JWT policy. These are the options how you can secure your Azure functions over by using the API managements. Okay. Okay, so the next one I have not included, but I have included in the morning. So these are the other options that you can include or to improve your security on the Azure functions. So we can do the allow IP restrictions on the Azure functions itself. And so these are the platform configurations. I'll quickly show you. Now I'll go to the Azure functions. Five minutes. Yeah. So I'll come to the configurations. So go to the general settings. So here you can see FTP state, it says FTPS only. That means secured FTP. So that is the recommended one. You should use it instead of using the FTP. So you should use only the HTTP. And when you enable the authentication, you can access your Azure function by using both HTTP or HTTPS. So, but we have to use only the HTTPS. This is the another recommendation version. And you have to disable the debugging. Otherwise, unnecessarily the debug informations will be passed through. And if you want to configure client certificates, so you can use these options. By default, it will be ignored. If you want to use require or allow, so you can use these options. Okay. And Yeah, so that's it. The next one will be on this. Okay, so these are the recommendations that I want to talk about. So always use the HTTPS instead of using the HTTP. Otherwise, though your request is authenticated by using an identity provider, still the tokens will be generated kind of in a plain text, which is not a suggested one. And always you have to verify your inputs, for example, for the SQL injections kind of stuffs, that you need to verify it. And always use the function level authorization rather than using the different authorization levels. And the course should be allowed only for your known domains or the requested domains that you are working for. And don't send the tokens in the request URL because it may be get logged. Always use the header options. And so use the Azure role-based access control to give the permissions for any of the resource or the users that you want to give. And use the managed identity instead of using the client ID or secret or key vault. And use the client certificates, that's the another best options as well. And those are the other things that we have seen, like disabling the remote debugging and disabling the FTP use. Always use the FTPS. I think based on this, at least you will be understanding what are the different options that you can enable to secure your Azure functions, and you can use some of the options available on the Azure API management as well. That's all pretty much I covered for this session. Thanks for everyone. So